Hello S2 and welcome to your next lesson on World War One. To start with, what we're doing, we start over here, picture in time. So you'll see here is a picture in the top right hand corner, which we will be discussing today. I see, I think, I wonder. So I want you to think about, what do you see in that picture? What do you think it might be? And in terms of wonder, what do you think might have caused that to happen as well? And we'll be discussing this later on. So just take a moment to think about, what do you actually see in the picture? What do you think it might be? What might it be? And then wonder what maybe might have caused it as well. Now, this is actually a photograph of a soldier suffering from trench foot in World War One. So today we're actually going to look at trench foot in a bit more detail. Now, your new heading for today in your jotters is life in the trenches. So what we are going to do today is we are learning about life in the trenches, and we're looking to empathise with soldiers in the trenches during World War One. So we're looking to describe some key features of conditions in the trenches. So last lesson you looked at what a trench actually was. So this week we're looking at conditions inside the trenches themselves and explain how these conditions would affect soldiers. And we're also going to look to construct a letter home detailing these points on how these conditions would have affected soldiers at this time. So, this picture here, which we actually discussed last session as well, shows you your typical trench layout in World War One. So you've got no man's land there, you've got the soldiers inside the trenches, and some of the conditions that they're facing, like you see there, the fact that the trenches are waterlogged, you've got rats in the trenches there as well, you've got an image of a spoon and the box, a lunch box, you've got an image of cards as well, and we'll be discussing all of these today in terms of conditions that soldiers faced. Now, the last image of World War One is one of a weary, injured soldier who's knee-deep in mud and water, stuck in the trenches in World War One. Now, over the course of the 4 long years of war, so remember it lasts from 1914 to 1918, the effects of long periods of time being exposed to the elements in the trenches starts to take its toll on soldiers, both physically in terms of things like trench foot, but also mentally as well. Now, there are a number of aspects of trench life which are important to investigate. So today we're going to look at food that soldiers got in the trenches in more detail. We're going to look at the issues with lice and rats in the trenches, issues with boredom and trench foot. So your first activity for today, in your jotters, what I'd like you to do is to draw this table in your jotter. So you have conditions in the trenches, so down the left hand side you've got food, rats and lice, trench foot and boredom and camaraderie. In the middle part you've got description of the main conditions, so I'm going to explain how we're going to fill this out, but you're looking to describe the main condition and then how would this have affected the soldier. So think about how this condition would have affected the soldiers at this time. So if you want to pause the video at this point just to sketch this table in your jotter. I'd take a whole page in your jotter for this. Okay, so activity 1, you're going to investigate the key features of conditions in the trenches. Now you're going to look to use the information sheets, which I've put in the file section also on the assignments tab as well for this week. You're going to use the information sheets to read the information and copy down the key points into your table. So you're looking to have the description of the main condition and how this would have affected the soldier in World War One. Now, for example, I've done the first one for you here. So we have food. So this is from the information sheet here. So we're just looking to summarise. You're not looking to write down all the points. You're just looking to summarise. So description of the main condition. So we've got here food in the trenches was poor. The main food was tinned bully beef with bread or biscuits. There was limited drinking water, so soldiers drank rum instead. Now, how would this have affected the soldier? You need to think about this. How do you think this would have affected the soldiers in the trenches? Well, they would have felt hungry and thirsty. The fact there was limited drinking water and food wasn't the best either. And maybe they felt quite sad at getting the same food over and over again as well. So that's just an example of what you need to do for the first one. So you're looking to do the same for rats and lice, trench foot and boredom and camaraderie. Thinking about describing this main condition, so summarising the key points and how this would have affected the soldier. So you want to pause the video at this point to complete this task. Now what we're going to do is just discuss some of the points you might have in your table in terms of key features of conditions in the trenches. So firstly with food. Now at the beginning of the war, food was quite good. So you had things like meat and vegetables, bully beef, bread, biscuits. But by the end of the war there was a lot of rations. So rations meant there was less food, so they had to limit the amount of food being given to soldiers. So rations were quite poor. You had bread made from turnips, you had little to no meat. Often horses were actually killed and used to provide soldiers with meat. You actually had weeds, so soldiers were fed things like nettles. You had hard biscuits and condensed milk as well. Now, catering staff would often be far away, so food would actually reach the trenches actually quite cold, and sometimes it would taste of petrol, because sometimes food or water was transported in old petrol canisters, so you had the taste of petrol lasting in it as well. There was a big difference between the food that the officers would receive and what the ordinary soldiers ate as well. The officers obviously receiving more substantial food than the ordinary soldiers. Now, this is an image here of soldiers also eating their food in World War One. These soldiers are quite lucky to actually have their tins there and their spoons. Quite a lot of soldiers at the time would actually just use their hands to eat their food. And this is again an example of some of the instruments the soldiers would have and some of the food that they would have. So you've got the bread there, you've got some of the tin meat that they would have as well. Now, this image here, this is an image of historian Dan Snow. Now, I've put the video link in the instructions for this. You're going to watch a short video, just come out the PowerPoint for a moment to watch a short video from Dan Snow about the food that soldiers actually received in World War One. So this details what the soldiers actually received and how it actually compared, the British soldiers compared to the Germans in terms of the amount of food that they received. So you want to pause the video at this point, come out and then click on the link that I posted in the instructions for this week to watch the Dan Snow video about food in the trenches for soldiers. Now, other issues that soldiers faced in the trench, which you would have found out from your information sheet, was lice and rats. Now, rats came to the trenches in their millions. They would often end up eating soldiers until they were the size of cats. Now, dead soldiers would be fed upon by the rats, so you had rats that got the size of small cats. Now, soldiers would try and get rid of them by using bayonets, rifles, or actually clubbing them to death if they could. And frontline soldiers rarely have ever washed, so this also led to infestations of lice. So soldiers found themselves being very, very itchy due to the fact they had lice as well. Now, they would live in the soldiers' seams of soldiers' clothes, and they also, as well as being itchy, would also cause diseases such as trench fever for soldiers as well. So lice weren't the best in the trenches either. Now, this is just an image here to show you. This is soldiers that have captured some rats that they found in the trenches there, and they're displaying them there. And this is the sort of lice that you would find in the trenches as well, that would attach themselves also to the soldiers' clothing and then feeding the soldiers themselves and cause things like trench fever and a lot of itching as well. And this is an image here of soldiers actually trying to pick some of the lice out of their clothing. Also, one of the main issues in the trenches was trench foot. Now, there was lots of health problems in the trenches, but the most well known and horrible way was a condition called trench foot. Now, this is an image here of trench foot. Now, if you imagine if you're out on a very, very wet day, or even when it's been snowing recently, if you're out on a snowy day and your feet get very, very cold and then very, very wet, sometimes when you take your socks off, your feet might wrinkle a wee bit and your skin might peel a bit. But we're lucky enough that we can then dry our feet. Soldiers in the trenches never had this luxury, so this meant that their skin would often peel off quite substantially there. Now, you'll see here this was caused by wet feet swelling painfully, and that happened because soldiers would always constantly be standing in waterlogged and muddy trenches for hours without being able to remove their socks and dry their feet. Now, the feet would then go numb and the skin even turn red or even blue. Now, if this was left untreated for a long, long time, then gangrenes would actually start to form on the foot, and then eventually it could end up meaning that your foot would need to be amputated. So this is just an image here of obviously soldiers' feet in World War One. You can see how muddy and how wet they are. And this is an image here obviously of a soldier in the trench in World War One. They would constantly find themselves in waterlogged trenches due to the fact the trenches were shelled, so massive holes would appear in the trenches, and then when it rained, obviously those holes would then gather with water. And that's an image there of trench foot there as well. You can see the soldier has lost some of their toes there as well due to trench foot. Now, a typical day in the trenches, you see here, a lot of people think, oh, the trenches, there's lots of fighting. There wasn't actually a lot of fighting that took place in the trenches on most days. So you see here, midnight to 4 a.m, wake up and stand to. So some soldiers would get some sleep, while others would need to be on patrol and be ready in case there was an enemy attack. Then from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m, you would get morning hay and some breakfast. 6 a.m. to 9 a.m, weapon cleaning and then inspections. 9 a.m. until 7:30 at night would be daily chores, so things like repairing the trenches, digging more trenches, repairing certain parts of the trench. And then 7:30 till 9, stand to, so be prepared for an attack, because that was arguably one of the most common times that an attack would be happening, or you would be sent to attack. And then the night working parties from 9 till midnight, so they would go out and repair things like the barbed wire. They transport parts or items from one part of the trench to the other, and you had relief as well, so soldiers on relief and being ready for a possible attack as well. So your typical day in the trenches didn't actually involve much fighting unless the enemy attacked or you were sent out to attack. On the whole, it would be sitting around quite a lot doing some daily chores, but there wasn't a lot of fighting that actually took place on a day-to-day basis. Now this led to a lot of boredom and camaraderie amongst the soldiers, so it's unsurprising that soldiers often experienced boredom because when no major offences were taking place there was little to do. So soldiers, to release this boredom, would write letters home, they would sing, or they would chat with their comrades. They would often form very close bonds with their fellow soldiers, particularly due to the PALS battalions, because a lot of them had joined up with their friends. And the boredom and constant fear of attack only contribute to mental health conditions such as shell shock, so soldiers became paranoid at times that they were about to be shelled or bombed due to their mental health issues, maybe having been previously bombed, and then they were worried about this happening again. Okay, the next activity. What we're going to do for activity number 2, we're going to think about how these different conditions would have affected the soldiers in the trenches itself. So we're going to look back at the table you completed and look in the last column where you thought about how soldiers were affected. I want you to think about how these conditions would have affected soldiers both physically and mentally/emotionally. So if you think, for example, food, physically, well, with a lack of food which we know the soldiers had, they would be malnourished, they would be hungry, they would be weak, their skin would be quite poor, their teeth would maybe suffer, they'd feel quite sick. So that'd be physical effects. Emotional effects, things like feeling disheartened, feeling bored, sad, angry, hopeless, or even scared. So that's just some of the effects that you might want to add into your table. Now, for activity 2, to help us to explain how these conditions would affect soldiers, you'll see here last time we're looking to construct a letter home detailing these points. So we want you to imagine that you are a soldier fighting on the front line in the trenches in World War I. What you're being asked to do is write a letter home to a family member or friend, it's up to you, describing what conditions are like in the trenches. Now there's things you need to mention in your letter. You need to mention the food that you are receiving, the issues with rats and lice, issues of trench foot, and issues of boredom. Now I want you to explain what effect these have on you in the trenches. And your challenge, if you can, you might not be able to do this as well, is to try and make your letter look 100 years old once you've written it. So see if you could make your letter look very, very old. Okay, over to you. So what you're looking to upload via Teams, your completed table on conditions faced in the trenches, so the description of the main condition and how this would have affected soldiers. So there's your table there, and then your completed letter home telling people about conditions in the trenches. You could write that to a family member or a friend and you can make up the name, it's up to you, you can do that as well. If you have any question at all about anything discussed in this lesson, then just ask your teacher. Thank you.